Welcome to the Deep Leadership Podcast. Today I'm joined by Kyle McDowell. Kyle is a best-selling author, speaker, and leadership coach. He has nearly 3 decades of experience leading thousands of employees at some of the largest companies in the U.S. And now he's the author of a new book called Begin with We, 10 Principles for Building and Sustaining a Culture of Excellence. I am excited to have him on the show to talk about what it takes to build a culture of excellence. So Kyle, welcome to the show.
Hey, John, it's great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks for being here. And I'm excited to talk about this. We were talking just before we got started. I wrote a book called All in the Same Boat. You wrote a book called Begin with We. I have a feeling that we're going to agree on a lot of things in this conversation. So I'm looking forward to it.
I sure hope so. I think. Hey, John, before we get started, tomorrow is Veterans Day, and I wanted to say thank you for your service, my friend.
Oh, thanks. As I mentioned before we started the show, I'm going to take tomorrow off. So I'm going to work from home and take it a little bit easy. So
well deserved.
I'm excited about it. It's nice. But thank you for that. I appreciate it.
Sure.
So let's talk about you a little bit before we get into the book and what you wrote about. Tell us about some of the great companies you worked for and some of the highlights of your career experiences before you kind of went into this world of coaching and speaking and writing.
Yeah, you bet. As you mentioned, I've got nearly 30 years inside of corporate America. And I began that journey back at the very young age of 17. I applied to work for a local bank here in Florida. I was 17 at the time, and I rolled the dice that the interview and a job offer might come after my birthday because, obviously the legal age, I think then was 18. I believe it still is now. And it worked. So I got the offer and accepted a role with a bank. And I just found myself taking on bigger and bigger roles with a broader scope and scale. And 30 years later, I've come to the conclusion that I've got more to offer based on the lessons and learnings that I attained throughout my journey of corporate America. And as you mentioned, I've been with, I was very, very fortunate in many ways to work for some really big companies, 3 Fortune 10, Bank of America, United Health Group, CVS Health. In nearly every role I ever was fortunate enough to have, I always felt the emphasis of and on people was my job. So as a leader, regardless if I was leading 5 or 50 or 15,000, I always knew that there was something to be said for the leader who spent an inordinate amount of time focusing on the team and the team's needs. So I was really lucky to have quite the journey. I'm not naive, and I won't mislead you. It wasn't always fun. I mean, I went through some periods of time with some folks that I would call bosses, not leaders, that, but in hindsight, they were just as influential to me as some of the more empowering and the great leaders that I was fortunate enough to be around. They gave me great examples of what not to do. But there was a flavor throughout my career that was almost all service oriented. So I've run huge service operations. So my last gig in corporate America before going out on my own and writing the book was with CVS Health, where I had 15,000 employees, a $2 billion budget, 40 plus locations, and a very, very important mission to help patients and citizens on their path to better health. Ran the world's largest mail order pharmacy for a time. We filled 53 million prescriptions a year. So there was a service component to every single role that I had, especially the last 10 or 15 years. And in nearly every one of those roles, probably since year 20 in corporate America, were all kind of a transformation in nature. So I had an opportunity to rewrite the culture in each of those organizations, which is where I found a lot of passion. And frankly, John, I get so much more satisfaction out of developing great leaders than any KPI I've ever achieved. So, I think that's probably the way I would describe the great journey that I've had. I'm a very, very lucky guy. And I'm now trying to kind of transition from that first chapter into the second chapter of my career. And that's paying back all the great lessons that I learned. And that was part of the reason for writing the book, is to get these messages out as wide and as far as I can.
I love it. I have a very similar story, so I love to hear this. You mentioned that you had a passion for people, you had a passion for cultures and leadership development. Do you know where that came from? I mean, it's interesting because I know where my passion came from, but as I talk to people on the podcast, I get it from different areas. Sometimes it's a grandfather, sometimes it's a boss that they work for, sometimes it's just it comes from different places. So I'm curious about you, where your passion came from.
Yeah. Yeah. So I was taught at a very young age by a single mother, who was a really hard worker. The golden rule was huge in our family.
Hmm.
Just we knew treating people, and I was from a very young age. I knew treating people was in a way that showed respect. Was really something that my sister and I were both. We learned at a very, very young age. But I tell you, one of the more formative experiences for me was I've played, or back in those days, I played football,
Hmm.
and I played the quarterback position. And I knew that if I didn't want to end up on my butt every single play,
Yeah.
I had to rally the team around me to do their jobs. And I think thirdly, John, I was raised in a very middle class family, but I was also exposed to many of my friends at that time. I grew up in a very, very rural area. Were not as fortunate as I was, and I would again classify myself as middle class. So I had this hardworking mom who taught me the value of work ethic. I was in sports, so I knew teamwork was very, very important. And I could see around me that not everybody had the same kind of benefits that I had.
Hmm.
So it was easy to me to see where those less fortunate than me were just as important as I was, mattered as much, smarter than me in most cases. So I recognized the value of people, serving people, making people better than they were the day before, or helping them anyway. And it's just been a passion of mine ever since.
I love it. That's great to hear. In fact, you mentioned respect first, and that's the number one rule at our company: treat everyone with respect. It's the number one rule.
Amen.
It's been what I've lived by all these years, and so it's good to hear you hearken to that same kind of idea, and helping other people, treating people with respect, and absolutely love that.
Yeah.
So, blue collar
Yeah.
work
Yeah.
ethic, that's important, right? I mean, it's a big part of uh what I'll say is becoming a leader worth following is like, when you're showing respect and you're willing to put in the work and you're willing to invest in your people, those are the skills that make you a leader worth following. So I love hearing all this. Is fantastic. um
Yeah.
why did you decide now to make a shift from corporate to go out on your own? What was there one thing that said it's time for me to do this, or was it a gradual thing over time?
Yeah, no, there was a sentinel moment, maybe two. So, um, the book, let me start there for a moment because I think that will, and I'll come
Yeah.
full circle. But so the book is Begin with We, 10 Principles for Building and Sustaining a Culture of Excellence. And um, I would say it was probably 2015, 2016. I had kind of an epiphany. I just left an organization where I had a boss, not a leader. I had a boss that just didn't inspire me or bring the best out of me, and I felt myself becoming a bit apathetic about corporate America in general. So I told myself if I was ever given the opportunity to lead an organization with complete autonomy, I was going to lead it very differently. I was going to lead in a way that I always wanted to be led. And I had 20-ish years in corporate America at that time. And as I mentioned, I was able to pull some of the bad experiences in my toolbox as examples of what not to do, and I had a handful of really great leaders and mentors. So I had a good combination, I felt, of what not to do and what worked, and kind of what worked for me, being led. Well, it turned out to be careful what you wish for, because in 2016, I was given a role. I landed a role in one of the most impactful uh, parts or periods of my career, where I was responsible for leading about 14,000
Oh, wow.
customer care professionals who were responsible for all of the enrollment functions for the Affordable Care Act, as well as 1-800 Medicare. 11 locations. It was a $6 billion program. And when I joined that organization, I was made aware pretty quickly that my predecessor led in a way that wasn't very inspiring.
Mm.
A very me-focused individual who really ruled by fear and intimidation. So when I took the role, I thought it was a real gut check moment for me. I thought this is the time that I've longed for. I'm gonna lead very differently, very authentically, less bureaucratically, but most of all with an eye on the people, an eye on the team, because I knew it was an organization I wasn't super familiar with, and it certainly wasn't a domain, the Affordable Care Act and 1-800-Medicare, that I was super familiar with. So I needed that team to bring me up to speed on the domain, and I felt like I had an opportunity to lend them some of the expertise that I'd picked up as a leader throughout the previous couple dozen years. Well, the night before I was about to meet with about 50 leaders of that organization, I sat in my hotel room in Lawrence, Kansas, and I had no idea what I was going to say.
I love it.
But it was that gut check moment. It said, "Okay, bud, this is what you wanted. Now you have the opportunity. Are you all talk, or can you really do this?"
Mm.
So that night, in about 3 hours, I scribbled on my laptop. That ultimately ended up with 10 sentences, and each of those sentences started with the word "we."
Yeah.
And I'm not that smart, or creative rather. So I said, I got 10 sentences. They all start with "we." We have the 10 we's. So the next morning I stepped out in front of the crowd and walked them through each of those, what I later coined as guiding principles, because it occurred to me, a principle really is a foundational belief. It's something that we hold to be true. And I felt if I could get the team to rally around these principles, and we have a shared set of beliefs, how we treat each other and how we treat those we serve, we'd be positioned for success. And maybe I could squash some of that negative leadership that they had been exposed to. I was with that organization for about 3 years, and John, man, the cultural transformation and the impact it had on so many people, including me, is so profound. I left that organization to take the role at CVS that I mentioned earlier, and I didn't have the same experience. The culture was not as open and inviting and open to transformation. I was hired to lead a transformation, but it's a big engine and it's a big machine trying to move, and it didn't move very fast. And after about a year, I realized it just wasn't for me. So to answer the question more directly and a little more succinctly, that was when I knew I had a lot to give, but it had to be to organizations that were really thirsty or hungry for change.
Mm.
And it wasn't really my decision, candidly. So when I left CVS, I was in a position where I had to make a choice. I was at a crossroad. Do I go back into corporate America, where I'd had really great success, or do I take these principles that have been so powerful for me and so many others and try to get them out into the universe and see what happened? Well, as I was debating the option to take on a new role, I started to get phone calls from my direct reports, from colleagues and others throughout the entire course of my career, but most notably the last few years, where I rolled out those principles. And they said, "Kyle, you talked all along about how important these principles are, and we've shown you how much they mean to us. You got to take this more broad. You got to go out and you got to write a book."
Yeah.
So there were, I went from this low period where the CVS gig didn't work out the way I had hoped, to such inspiration and motivation from people that at that point I could tell they genuinely cared about my next step. And they propelled me and compelled me to put the book together. So the book was really the first step of I thought I'd write the book. I thought I'd sell a few copies, maybe a couple hundred copies. But man, so humbled to share that it's become a USA Today bestseller, a Wall Street Journal bestseller. Actually hit bestseller status in 9 different categories on Amazon.
Nice.
So then I thought, okay, this is really the gut check time. I've got to put a business together, take this show on the road, and that's what I've been up to the last year or so.
I love it. That's so good to hear. And it's really remarkable. I've read in your book, that story of you writing the 10 we's, and I I imagine that when you were writing those for that meeting that you had, that you never expected that you'd end up writing the book and then, doing this now full time. I imagine that was probably a bit of a surprise to you as you look back on it.
John, I had no idea. As a matter of fact, I didn't even know that the principles, I didn't even call them principles until maybe a day or two later. And I even told the team, because you have to understand, man, when I'm giving this presentation to these 40 or 50 people, about half the crew was open. I would say a quarter of them not open at all. And the last quarter were just kind of skeptical. You could just read it on their faces. And I was really uncertain that I had done anything that was, would resonate. But ultimately I learned they did resonate, but I was very clear. I did not want those principles to be words on a wall. I didn't want a hollow mission statement. I wanted this to be something we could really subscribe to. And I told the team, if you want to create an 11th we can do that. If you want to have 5 we's, I don't care. But the point is, these are non-negotiables. By the way, the entire presentation was in black and white on purpose. Black background, white letters, because this is not negotiable. And we'll talk about the we's, I hope, here in a little bit. But the point is they are really tough to refute, and they become kind of a cultural currency, where everyone has the same value. The currency has the same value. And regardless of, if you're the newest intern or the CEO, everyone has the same obligation to use these principles every single day. And I'm happy to admit, by the way, I left that organization back in 2019. The We's are still the cultural manifesto for that organization. They have the We Awards twice a year. And they actually even had me back to deliver a keynote back in August, again, many, many years after I left. So I think it just shows you how well it's resonated and it's stuck, which is so humbling to me, because as you mentioned, and as you alluded to or questioned, I had no idea this was going to end up where it has.
I love it.
But I'm so grateful.
It's almost like, your all your experiences up to that point, and then you were about to embark on something different and you wanted to change the culture. You took all those experiences and you put it into 10 phrases that ended up resonating, but it didn't come from you being you were an experienced leader at that point, and you knew what you wanted to do, and that came out of all that experience. So it's really that I love that part of it, and I love the story in the book, the way you write it. So let's talk about the book. I love it. It's called Begin With We: 10 Principles for Building and Sustaining a Culture of Excellence. These in the book, you're covering these 10 the 10 we's, and each of the chapter you cover the 10 we's, which I love the way you're doing it. Let's talk about some of those, because I think they're really interesting to talk about. So let's say one of the things you have is we lead by example. So what does that look like? In how do you phrase it, and what does that mean?
Yeah, so I think it's important to note the very first we. You mentioned we too. The very first we is we do the right thing.
Yeah.
Always. And I never leave out that second one-word sentence, always, because as you know, throughout your experiences, the right thing can be very subjective, and what some people view as the right thing one day, the scenario or situation might change slightly, or perhaps the waters have gotten a little rougher and the right thing now is a little bit different. So there's no negotiation there. The second we is the one that you're asking about, and I think it's an absolute perfect kind of bookend to the first one, and that is, if we're going to do the right thing, always, we're going to lead by example. We must lead by example, and as you know, you're already leading by example. The choice is, or the question is, are you leading by an example that you'd be proud for others to follow? Is it an example that would create followership? Is it an example that your mother would be proud of the way you're behaving? If it made the press, would you be ashamed of your behavior? Are you leading in a way that inspires others to do the exact same things? Pay forward how attentive you are to the team. Pay forward how selfless you are. Pay forward how you empower the team, how you inspire them. So it's a choice that all leaders have to make: is do you want to lead by example? And by the way, that example is something that you're proud of. And it ranges from very big scenarios to very small scenarios. A silly example that I always talk about is, if I'm walking through the hallway of the office and I've got my head down on my phone and a team member's walking by and I don't lift up to say hello, what example have I set? I've told the person, you're not important enough to just give you an eye contact or say hello or give you a smile, because what's going on in here is more important. That's not the example I want to be known for. And
I
likewise for
love
the
that you
teams and
just,
the individual.
yeah, I was gonna say, I love that you
Yeah.
tell that story, because I actually experienced as a plant manager one time. I had an employee come to me and say, I just want to let you know that one of your managers, he doesn't really care about us. He's always
Oh,
busy. He's got his head down. He doesn't seem to care. And when he told me the name of the manager,
right.
he's the guy that cares the most about the employees. But it was just he was one of these guys that was always thinking about his next thing, and so he would keep his head down as he walked through the plant, so they wouldn't get interrupted, because he was always busy and working on the next project. And so, but
Yeah.
the message he sent as he walked through the shop with the
Right.
head down was, "You're not important. I don't have time for you. I'm working on other
That's
things
right.
that are more important than you." And the truth is, he was a guy that really did care, but it was the body language.
Yeah.
And that's why I love what you just said. The idea of you're down on your phone's more important than the person in front of you. So
Yeah.
I love that. And
Yeah.
just and people are watching us as leaders all the time. And just those little things that we do, our mannerisms and how we react when they're nearby, they're noticing every little thing that we do.
You're under a microscope
Yeah.
24/7, especially in today's world, right? Everyone's got a cell phone, everyone's got a camera. You're always under the microscope, and I'm not naive, John. And I don't want to come across Pollyannish or all unicorns and rainbows. It takes work.
Yeah.
It takes work to put on that smile. I have this gut check every time I walk into the office, and I tell myself, this is every day. I literally tell myself, smile. Do I
Yeah.
feel like smiling every single day that I walk in? Of course I don't. But that example, the way that I behave and how people perceive the energy that I'm giving off
Yeah.
will be replicated. So I would much rather be known for the guy that's always smiling, maybe a little corny at times, than the guy that's always down on his phone with the scowl. Because I think that gets replicated and
Yeah.
replayed over and over more times than we're ever aware of as leaders.
Oh yeah, Colin Powell would say that attitude is contagious, and I do truly believe that. So if we're even when we're not,
Absolutely.
even though we're not feeling it, we're on stage. You're on stage all the
That's right.
time, and you've got to be on stage, and you have to be positive. I mean, I think you have to be authentic. You can't be faking it. You have to have authentic reactions to problems and things. But
Yes.
the truth of the matter is, you
Yes.
generally have to be upbeat, positive, and
That's right.
and focus on the visions that you're heading towards, and not just being dragged down into the problems of the present, but keep everybody focused on the
That's right.
vision and where we're headed. Yeah, I love that. A
That's right.
lead
And
by
John, you
example
used
is
the
just
word.
such an important part. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's one of my favorites. And you mentioned a word that I really use a lot, and that's authenticity. Because there's a difference between smiling and being positive, and being authentic. I my team knows when I'm disappointed. They know when I'm upset. They know when I'm mad. I don't hide any of those things, because that would be less than authentic. So, but when you're walking through a crowd or you're on stage or whatever the environment is, you must portray confidence, but it needs to be authentic confidence. So when I don't know the answer, I say, I don't know.
Yeah.
Let me get back to you, or let me look into that for you. I rarely have all the answers, and that's why you try to find and hire people that are smarter than you, know more about the work than you do. And then it's my job just to remove the barriers to allow them to be great.
I love it. It's such powerful
Thank
words.
you.
I don't even want to add anything to it. It's just so perfect. So one of the things you have in there, you say, we pick each other up. I love this. What does that mean?
Yeah. So again, I think the preceding we is really important to give you some context before we go to that one, and that's we own our mistakes. So we 5 is we own our mistakes. I think it's really important to create an environment where the team is comfortable enough to say, I blew it. They're comfortable enough to raise their hand and say, I need help. They're comfortable enough to say, I've got some stuff going outside of work and it's probably impacting my work product, but boss or leader, I need your help. So if we expect people to raise their hand when they make a mistake and call for help, then we must be in a position to pick them up. And that's we 6, we pick each other up. And there are 2 components to that, John, that I'm really adamant about. And the first is the obvious one, and that's when someone's stumbling or they've erred. maybe they're down, there's something going on outside of work that's contributing to kind of a slip in their behavior or their performance. As a leader, you got to pick them up.
Mm.
It's really literally extending a hand, literally at times that's required. But also just reaffirming that they are the person that you need in that role. They're the person that you believe in, and they add value to the organization. But the second part, I think, is just as important, and that is it's the leader's obligation to pick the person up and propel them to new heights. And so what does that mean? So if you're down, I'm going to pick you up, and I'm going to get you back to where we know you can be. But also, once you're at that point, it's my responsibility as your leader to help you find a new height. And that can be a promotion within my team. It can be a promotion within our organization. It can even be a job outside of our company, which a lot of people don't necessarily subscribe to that theory. I see it very differently. And there's a story I'll tell, a very brief one, that is why I feel this way. At one point in my career, and this was not too long ago, had an employee, a fella on the team who was looking at a role outside of the organization. And because I'd created this open and candid environment where we were allowed to share anything, he came to me and he said, I've got this job opportunity. I'm in talks with them, big raise for him, big increase in scope. If I am the we-oriented leader that I profess to be, I have one response to that, and that's, how can I help you? How can I help you land that role? Well, in this scenario, he didn't get the job, but how do you think he performed when he came back to my team, realizing that that role wasn't going to happen? His dedication and commitment to me was tenfold before he looked into that opportunity, because he knew now I had proven to him I was more interested in his performance, his growth, and his development than I was my own, than I was the team. He's a star on our team, but he wanted to do something different. And I felt like I'd be an incredible hypocrite if I didn't help him get to that role. Unfortunately, he didn't get the role, but he came back and has been promoted with us since then. So it's been that I feel like if you're going to pick someone up, you can't do one without the other, or else you're a hypocrite. If I pick you up, but I don't propel you forward, I must only care about getting you back to where your performance is to benefit us. But if I pick you up and propel you forward, I care about you.
Yeah, I love it. That's such a great lesson in this book, and it's one I talk about a lot when I speak to college students. I tell the story of a boss that had my back. I was a young R&D engineer, and we failed at a test lab. We built a prototype. We went to the test lab. We were doing something that's never been done before, and the first test, we spent a lot of money getting this product there, and the product blew up. And I was the lead mechanical engineer. I was running the test program. And I remember I had to call my boss back at our, at the headquarters, and I had to tell him we failed the test. And I remember he just had two questions for me. He says, "Do you know what happened?" And I did. I knew right away how we failed and why we failed. And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Can you fix it?" And I knew right away what I needed to do to fix it. I said, "Absolutely." He says, "Great." He said, "Get back here. Let's get the redesign done and get back up to the test lab as quick as we can." And instead of like my career ending at that point, he picked me up, right? And he gave me a new mission, which was to redesign and get back to the test lab. And even though I know that he took heat over this failure, he never he kept me, he shielded me from that heat, and he's picked me up and put me in a new direction. And the point is that I tell this story. This happened 30 years ago, and I still tell the story. It's in my
next
books.
question.
I still tell this to college students every time I talk to them about what their roles need to be as leaders. And this idea, and like you said too, is I would run through a wall for that guy after that experience, right? Because he picked me up, put me on a new path, and he didn't, and he knew what I was doing had never been done before, and so there was a risk that there would be a failure. But instead of throwing me under a bus, he took the heat and he shielded me, and he said, I'll give you cover, essentially. Let's get this thing redesigned and get back to the lab. It turns out the product was the first in the industry. We set all these records, all these global patent awards, and millions of dollars, because we developed something that had never been done before. And but it was because he had my back. And I think that's a really important lesson in this book, in this, in what you're doing. So thank you for bringing that up. That's an excellent
Well,
point.
I love that story. I love the story you just shared, and I think it highlights something that we touched on earlier, and that's the impact that the leader has without even knowing it. Right?
Yeah.
You're talking about the story from 30 years ago, man.
Right.
It had such an impact on you. You're still, and it made it to your book. I just think that's a beautiful thing to be able to say. And anytime, if someone's telling that story and you're in that leadership role, boy, what a great feeling. I just think it's a wonderful story. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's just an example of what your principles that you're putting out in these books. I've experienced them. I've seen them in real life, and they do make a difference. They make a powerful difference. The idea of we versus I is such an important part of this book that I'm really glad that you put this out. Let's take one more,
Thank
and
you.
then before we wrap up. And so I do this thing in my books. I talk about run to the fire. I'm a trained firefighter in the Navy, right? But you say we take action. So I want to hear what you say about that. We take action.
Yeah, man. So we take action. The spirit behind we take action is, there's this malaise inside a lot of organizations, especially really big ones that really smart people see problems but don't do anything about it, because if they stumble, if they fail, they're going to get smacked around.
Yep.
There's going to be retribution. There's going to be, like the scenario you just described, right? If you fail, if you make a mistake, you're going to get fired. So
Yes.
why should I put my neck out? Why should I try something different? Why should I take action? Because there's no incentive for me to do that. The biggest companies in the world, at least the ones that I've been associated with, they are littered with people that do a great job keeping their head down, don't rock the boat, and continue to perpetuate the status quo. But I'll tell you, in a culture of excellence, if you really want to deliver a great product or service, if you want to have a team that's really committed to that great product or service, you've got to give them the opportunity to take action. And said very, very simply, if you see something, do something. In the business that I've been in, I've done a lot of work in the call center space, and I've seen this scenario that I'm about to share countless times. So when a new hire comes in, they go through training and they go through something that's called nesting. And it's basically OJT. It's on the job training. They leave the training room, they come down, they sit with a tenured call center person shoulder to shoulder. And I've seen this so many times. The tenured person will say, they tell us to do it this way, but I'm going to tell you exactly I'm going to tell you how we do it just to get this done. Right. Well, that is a perfect example of someone not taking action. So we have a team that knows that the way that we do things isn't the right or the most efficient way, but no one's raising their hand to say, this isn't right. We have to change it. So what happens? Mediocrity abound, and everything is kind of a click below where it could be or should be, because no one's taking the initiative to say, hey, we got to take action because this thing ain't working. So it's really about that. If you see an opportunity in a culture of excellence, if you see an opportunity, you are obligated to point it out. Now, the leader can say, we're not going to do anything about that. They should always explain why we're not going to do anything about it. But to let it sit in a corner somewhere without addressing it, or at least acknowledging it, that is perpetuating the status quo. And that's not excellent in my book.
I love it. That's great. And that's why all this tribal knowledge kind of grows out of organizations, because we don't actually elevate those problems to a point where we can solve it. So everybody's doing it the same way, in the
Well
right
said.
way, and the
Well
most
said.
efficient way. So
Yep.
that's
Yep.
absolutely
That's
right.
right, John.
Well,
Yep.
this has been fantastic. So Kyle, how can people find out more about you, your company, what you do, and then this new book that's out there?
Sure. So I'm available on all social platforms at Kyle McDowell Inc. The website is KyleMcDowellInc.com. We've talked about the book, Begin with We. And John, I got to tell you, man, it's as cliche or as corny as it might sound, since I made the decision for this second chapter of my life or of my career, it's my purpose. I'm absolutely committed and dedicated to evangelizing these principles because I've seen them work. I've seen people find fulfillment, passion, and be so rewarded for work that they once found themselves being so disenfranchised and apathetic about. The beauty of principles, and I'm the first to admit, is these principles, they're not rocket science. There's nothing very inflammatory here, but the beauty of them is when you combine them into a series of beliefs that we all agree to subscribe to, and we align around them, they fuel the organization. And they give us a series of guideposts that kind of dictate how we react when faced with adversity, or how we react when we're faced with challenges. So that's my goal. It's my purpose. So I've been doing a lot of speaking, a lot of podcasts, and obviously trying to promote the book to get the word out there. And as cliche as it sounds, it's not about money. It's not about trying to sell a bunch of books. It's about trying to sell the message. Because I truly believe there's a better corporate America to be had if we all subscribe to something that we all can believe in together.
Absolutely right. Wow. Amen to that one. I truly believe in that same exact thing. Absolutely. So the book is Begin with We, 10 Principles for Building and Sustaining a Culture of Excellence. Highly recommend it. Go out there, get this book. If you want to really make a difference, these are the principles. And I love how you've laid it out, 10 simple principles, and you tell the stories behind them and how they can be effective. I encourage everyone that's listening in, get this book, read it, and then really, use these principles to lead your business and to build a culture of excellence in your own company. Kyle, thank you for coming on the show, sharing this wisdom, such powerful words, and it's so consistent with what I've experienced as well in all my years in corporate and now as an entrepreneur. So thanks for coming on the show, and thanks for sharing this great book.
It's my pleasure, truly, John. Thank you.
Well, thanks again. Well, that's it for today. Thank you for listening to Deep Leadership. If you like this podcast, please subscribe and share so we can continue to build a world with better bosses. Until next time, this is John Reddy saying take care and lead well.